Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists. All right, welcome to the podcast, everyone. We have kind of a unique situation this week. We have Will on the road in Chicago, patching him in. So thanks for doing that, Will. Thanks for being with us.
Well, good morning, Douglas. You may not be able to see my pretty face here. I'm actually signed into the Moxie Hotel downtown Chicago. I literally was going down to get my truck. And get my laptop connections and get all set up and have a little makeshift podcast studio in my hotel room.
Yeah.
And I'm walking through the lobby, and I shit you not, there is a podcast studio in the lobby of my hotel.
Like, that is hilarious. I mean, these podcasts are such a common thing now. When I tell people, like especially my kids and there's Gen Z friends that I have a podcast, they're like, of course you do. They're like, you're like officially an internet meme. And I honestly have no idea what that even means. Do you know what that means?
I know what that means. They're not flattering you, Douglas.
I don't think so.
They are mocking you. So yeah, I'm down here, and it's funny. I'm in a little room in the center of the hotel lobby, glass on all three sides, and a couple of chairs. I could have a guest. I've got a better microphone in here than I do in my home studio. Yeah, I mean the whole thing. Wow. It sounds pretty great to me, other than the fact that I've been running my mouth for the past 4 days straight here in Chicago.
Yeah, you sound like it might be Mac Truck Monday. Like you use that phrase often enough.
I do. I feel like chewed food. I've used that as well, and I'm socialed out. I can't.
The listeners appreciate you, checking in here because they got to hear your voice every couple of weeks. Well, it's important.
Speaking of listeners, we've got a loyal listener, and I got to give a shout out to longtime listener and Art World's Lil Buddy, Oscar.
Lil Buddy.
Like he's the Art World mascot almost. He's right there in all the meetings and out there thriving, and picked up a reproduction for me over the weekend. I thought that was sweet. So thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Nice to meet him face to face.
Well, back in my one-of-a-kind days, I remember that 1 week often felt like I had moved in for the month. And when the show is over, you literally feel like you've done a month-long show.
Yeah, you definitely set up a store at that show. You set up your gallery and you're there. It's kind of funny the way that I had it set up. You could see my booth, my buddy Greg Turco's booth, and then Michael Schwegman's booth, all three right there. And we had ourselves like right there at their little cafe and music area. We had ourselves a table and like a little office. Like we just sat there all weekend with my boys there. So that was
so you weren't trapped in your little cubby. You could babysit the booth from a little bit from afar, so people didn't feel you hovering.
Yeah, across the hallway. I always like to give people a little bit of space. A little bit of space to move around. I had a big 15 by 10 booth there. So
it was fantastic. Geez, I was so excited to see your display and your work and the red walls, everything about it. Just, you took it up another notch, man. I mean, it was just fantastic.
It was interesting to me, how they offered wallpaper for the wall.
Wallpaper? Yeah. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It was literally like I kind of expected, and I called ahead and I'm like, look, is it going to be like a big vinyl sticker? I don't want shiny walls. We're artists. We have a certain aesthetic. And I'm like, I don't want it to be shiny. I kind of imagined it would be like a vinyl installation wallpaper kind of thing that they could take on and off. Okay. So I got there, and it was, you can log on to the Independent Artist Podcast Facebook page if you want to see the pictures. You were kind enough to post those, but
sure. Yep.
What I found interesting was like I got there and I'm like, I spent $300. These people rolled out literal paper, like it's paper on those.
Oh, they don't paint them. So it's paper that. Okay, gotcha. Mm-hmm.
9 foot tall paper roll that they rolled out and then sliced with a razor and cut right and stapled up, and it looks like paint. I'll save my money. I was talking to Turco over the weekend. I'm like, you want to share a roll of paper and pick a color and kind of do, because we have this whole spot. We have like a little island where I'm right next to him. And the benefit of, if you've seen his photography, our collectors are the same. A lot of, if I'm collecting Turco, then you're going to be interested in what I have as well. Like it just fits in
it goes together really well.
Yeah. He's not my competition. He's my
enhancement.
Yeah, right. Great word for sure. I mean, it's like if we had a couple of big guys over the weekend that somebody that had several of his pieces, bought a couple more, then immediately just went over next door. And I mean, he's, I'm bringing people over to him. He's bringing people over to me. It definitely goes hand in hand with that.
It's the classic yes and. We talk about that on the podcast. The yes, we like to add to. So we've got to have someone next to you that you're friends with, but then you can add to the collectors, collections. Then that's awesome.
It goes hand in hand with that thing you posted the other day about, us not being each other's competitors. We are not, we're not trying to win. We're trying to,
all boats rise as one.
There you go.
All right. So, I mean, I've been all over Chicago and stuck in the merchandise mart and everything, but what have you been up to?
I love being able to keep tabs on everyone and see what everyone's up to because I'm trapped, but my spirits are doing really good. I've turned this corner of recovery where at first it was after surgery was barely able to lift my head up and my leg would swell into a freaking balloon or something.
Worst part, honestly. Yeah.
But now I'm able to get up and about. And last week we kind of had our first kind of outing. We were trying to get ready to see if I was going to be able to attend my nephew's wedding, which was this past weekend, which was beautiful. His wedding reception. Shout out to the happy couple, Corey and Sammy. Love you guys. But earlier in the week, my niece, his sister, is
not listening to the show.
Yes, they might be.
They got better than you. All right.
But anyway, so we went, we did a kind of a trial run, see what this was going to be like for me to navigate out in the real world again, down to her place because she's a hairdresser. So she cut my wife's hair. Obviously don't need my haircut, as those of you who know me.
You need a rag. You need a rag. Polish it.
Yeah, she did do that. She took care of the eyebrows, so everyone will be happy to know that my eyebrows weren't out of control for this event. But so it get me all into the house and use the jaws of life, getting me out of the car and through a garage and into the house and onto the couch. And she's got this amazing puppy. It's a golden retriever puppy who's a year old. And so it's a full-sized big dog, but with puppy energy. And this dog doesn't know that it has to be careful around my leg, that I've got the surgery came in at $65,000, you know what I mean, worth of work done on this ankle of mine. And it decides it's going to start using my cast as a chew toy. It was entertaining. Nothing bad happened. It was just getting myself back into the real world again and not being so careful and delicate and everything. So
yeah, I definitely felt the same way when I got out there and felt like I needed to wrap myself in bubble wrap before I left the house.
Yeah.
But you had a good outing.
It was good. It made me feel like I can do this. I can actually get out and about. I can go to stores. We went out to a restaurant. So I'm not so housebound anymore, which has done wonders for my mood and for getting ready for, kind of this next stage of things.
Nice. Went to a restaurant like a big kid.
Like a big kid. In fact, you got me so interested in going to the Olive Garden after your story last time about being a bartender at the Olive Garden. So
shut up. Okay, you've made it out of the house after how many weeks, and you went to the Olive Garden?
Well, it was more of convenience than anything. It was one of those, we were out doing an errand and we were hungry, and there happened to be an Olive Garden right there, as there is in any strip mall USA. So we were like, let's grab some pasta. So that's what we did.
Did they sing the Hospitaliano song for you?
No idea what that even means.
That's the birthday song. No. All right. Okay. Yeah, congratulations on making it out and making it as far as your local strip mall and the wedding and all that.
Yeah, so things are going good around here, and I just appreciate everyone, and everyone's checking in on me. So thanks for that, and I think it's going to be okay. I think all that worrying that I did all year, it's all going to be okay.
Worrying is just praying for things that you don't want to happen.
That's true. It's we're going to get into the whole manifesting your fear type thing. It's true. Worrying, all that does is just, it brings that shit right to front and center. So, back that shit up.
So, long weekend. I've been doing the show. It's probably the longest running show that I've ever done. It's carried me through, one of a kind has carried me through, previous body of work into this. I think I've done this every year that One of a Kind has been going, except for the year my second year. I think we gave it a break to let it grow a little bit more, and starting year 3 all the way through, except for the year my first daughter was born, did not go that year. But besides that, I've been to One of a Kind for since 2002. I feel like I should win an award.
Well, think of the nostalgia, like you were talking last week. We have this romance, this nostalgia around some of these events, and I'm just really glad it's still strong for you, and it's pulling out what you need, what you want from it. So that's awesome.
What's interesting about it, last year I did the show, and I was like, I was kind of a little disgruntled because I had a fine weekend, but the sales that I made were all to clients off of my mailing list. They were clients that I brought in. And I judge shows a lot of times by, am I doing the work or are they doing the work?
Because, gotcha. There has to be a balance of new stuff coming in and not just the repeat.
Yeah. I got to have new clients that they're bringing in and not just the ones that I've brought to the table. And clients that I expected to see, that I've seen year after year, I didn't necessarily see those guys. But honestly, the sales that I made this time around were not to the collectors from years after year. They were new ones.
Awesome. That's awesome to feel like you've got the fresh blood and new stuff in circulation. That's
but the show, I feel like every show gets an enema every now and then, and they wash things away, and new people come in, and I'm sad to see some friends that mentioned, I won't mention them by name, but were pissed off because it didn't work for them this year, and it had in the past. And I mean, shows are shows. They're always the same. So you're not really sure what you're going to get. But, I definitely heard from some folks that were like, not coming back. And then they give you the opportunity at that one. I mean, if you've got your checkbook, then they're letting you back. That's how they script out.
The prime thing, I mean, we've talked about this last week, is a lot of times we feel this urge to sign on the dotted line, to answer back to the email right away, because we want that spot again. We want the place where the returning people come, or if it's an especially visible spot for new people, we want to sign on the dotted line and reserve that spot. So One of a Kind lets you do that. If you pony up the contract right there on the spot, you kind of know you're slotted back where you'd been.
Yeah, you save a couple $100 off of an already expensive booth. So, that's good. What I really enjoyed about it this year, differences. One thing that people have complained about in the past is that it gets super claustrophobic back there in the hallways. You get back in the bowels of the merchandise mart, start winding through, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to push somebody down and just run out of here. So what they did in these 10 by 10s, there are a lot more 20 by 5s.
Gotcha.
The same which opens up the hallways a lot wider.
That's important. And, a good friend of ours I saw online, their display, the Fullbots, we've talked about them. They've been topic of conversation. Their booth looked phenomenal that way. They didn't need to have a deep booth. They could really have a long, narrow display of their pieces. It was really visible.
Yeah, it is visible. And then you're also walking down and you get, how many times have you been at a show and just a regular show and people are walking down and they're like, oh, are you new? And you're like, no, I've been here 5 years in a row. But if something distracts you, it's like 10 feet is what, a pace and a half.
Yeah.
So just like, all it takes is your baby crying, something distracting you here. Somebody else is across the way. Maybe there's rideable mustaches across in the next booth and it tracks from you.
Well, even more than that, if you feel like you're trying to get from point A to point B and you're just stuck, you're just like planning your way to fit through the crowd and you're not looking. You're not enjoying the experience. Like you said, it's like the cattle trying to make your way down the chute.
Yeah, and you've got a 20-foot booth, even though it's only 5 deep. A lot more exposure, so thought that was interesting.
Cool.
So folks, it's interesting to be set up here in this hotel lobby, and I'm glass on all sides. I'm in a little people aquarium, but it's a dark little booth. I'm seeing artists leave. I just there's my boy Michael Schwegman just walked out. He's loading his van out as I speak. It's kind of interesting.
Give him the old wave as he walks by.
That's right. I hammered on my glass.
Is it bringing you back to your old DJ days? You know how some of those you sit and you can look out.
Oh, yeah, I love that. I love glass on all sides, and it's an insulated booth. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was literally going out to get my charger. I picked up a pair of headphones that were, of course, I forgot my headphones, and So I'm gonna set up, and I'm staying at a hotel. It's very hip, like it's just painfully hip. It's so hip, I can't believe that it actually works.
Okay, it's almost like it's so hip, it's like laughable.
Well, it is to me, but it definitely works for people. Like if they build it, they will come. It's filled with hipsters. It's starting at 5 o'clock, just having tacos and cocktails and all this stuff. So,
is it walking distance from the Mart, or did you have to Uber?
No, it's super close. It's a block and a half. It's like perfect. One of the cheaper. It's not cheap, but I mean, it got cheap these days in downtown Chicago. I mean, the fact that I got something for under $200 is amazing. But you check in at the bar. You can go play giant Jenga or giant Connect 4, or you can go, play Scrabble on the board. That's giant Scrabble on the board. But, I'm looking across and like the Scrabble board is boobs and poop and eat me. Like that's well, that's what we're dealing with.
It is laughable thinking about what shows have evolved into. If we were to think about, like, for example, today's guest, Duke Klassen, what he saw back in 1972, do you think anybody from back when the early days of shows could have ever looked forward to something like the One of a Kind show and think of it as that's what's coming down the track or down the pike?
Right. Yeah. Thinking about a $4,000 booth.
Right.
No, I don't think they were thinking about that for sure.
He does talk about in this episode how the evolution or the birth of what he calls the super shows really changed the industry. And I think that was just a fascinating topic that I can't wait for people to, we all kind of feel like we're chasing those super shows. We want to have a handful of those shows peppered in with our other schedules so we can really
trying to make super shows happen. You said it like 4 times in the last 2 sentences.
Super show. I'm overly caffeinated, so I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, I do like that about the show. Sometimes terms that we have from guests or things that you or I have said have kind of entered the lexicon. So that it is definitely, I know what that means. And it's like, I always call them A-listers or majors and mid-majors is how I've always treat them like golf tournaments. It's like, well, here's, the Indianapolis 500 may not count as more points on the schedule, but it feels like a bigger one. But yeah, it's good to be done. I'm done for the year.
Well, I know that feeling. It is kind of like everything that you put your energy in towards. It's like coasting into home and planning next year. So go home. And you're going to be on your couch for a few weeks. We know that that's always your post one of a kind gift is you come home with some kind of illness or virus you take home with you.
Yeah, we'll see. I've got my folks are coming actually on Friday. So
cool.
Coming for the holidays. My mom, she said one of her bucket list things was she always wanted to see Santa Fe at Christmas. And I'm like, well, we can make that happen.
Make that happen.
Yeah, their gift this year was flying them into Santa Fe. And yeah, we're going to have a great week, have some big plans. And it's funny. It's like, what do we want to do? And I'm looking at things that you can do for, the holidays. I'm like, well, John Waters' Holiday Spectacular is at the Linsick. I don't think Mom would like that one. I don't know why.
Leave it to Will to find the outing or the activity that might make his mom just a little uncomfortable, huh? What do you think?
Poor mom. She's been tested for the last 50 years. But I test my poor mother. But they'll have a great time. They're not staying with us out in. We're about 20 minutes outside of Santa Fe downtown. They're staying right on the square, and the lights are out and everything's been lit up in the plaza. So we're going to have a big time. Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about Duke and super shows. And I don't know. I think it's incredibly rewarding to get a voice of somebody who's still so fresh, but has been in the industry for so long.
So he tells a lot of little fun stories that we can all relate to throughout, but stick to the end. At the end of his interview, he tells some of his funny one-liners or his funny things that he's encountered on the road with customers that are priceless. They're guaranteed to have you rolling. So Listen to the end, everyone.
Absolutely. Duke Klassen is a freaking gem in our industry. I'm really appreciating his time and insight. So let's turn it up.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap. the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
Well, sometimes I'm in a real hurry, and I just love that I have things that are saved in Zap to streamline my process.
Saving shows as favorites is my personal way of using Zap. That's my favorite. I know a lot of people use the calendar, they use the events, but for me, if I'm saving the favorites of anything I've ever looked at or thought about doing, then I can check out those deadlines on a regular basis.
But then there's other times when I have a little more time on my hands and I'm looking into other shows. All the information is right there in the prospectus with links to the website. I can see who the artists are that have participated in the past.
That's a great idea, Douglas, because one of the ways that I was finding shows at the very beginning was to go online and see who I felt my work looked good with.
It's just great that all that information is organized and easy to look over when planning our next show season. Well, I have a very special guest with me here today, someone I've known for over 21 years, and I think a lot of people out on the road know him too. So welcome to the show, Duke Klassen from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hey, Duke.
Hey, nice to see you.
You too, man. How you been?
Very good, very good.
Yeah?
Had a pretty good winter so far.
I talked to you last week, and you said you're just back from a big trip.
Yes, I went to France and to Italy for 3 weeks.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Originally, I just had planned to go to Italy, but then I added a side trip to Paris in advance. Ladessa and I, my wife and I, lived in Paris for about 4 months years ago.
So in the Wayback Machine, when you guys first...
Yeah, when we first met, I mean, it's the very first thing we did is we sold everything and moved to Paris for 4 months. And then we continued on for another 8 months of traveling after that until the money ran out.
So was it designed to just be like let's go have an experience? And
Exactly. Well, we thought, let's just travel. We got to know each other quite well in a year.
How long had you known each other before you decided to launch this big trip together?
A very short time. In fact, I mentioned it to Ladessa maybe about 2 weeks after I met, and I told her that I was going to Europe, and she says, I'm coming too. And I thought,
okay,
wow, I hardly know you.
Well, she wanted to get to know you, right?
Right.
What better way?
She had a studio right around the corner from my apartment. She didn't have enough money for an apartment and a store, rather, not a studio.
Okay.
And so she was sleeping behind a bookcase. And not too long after we met, I met her at the door, and she was standing there with her arms outstretched with her clothes on her arms and said, I'm moving in. So that was sort of the beginning of our relationship, yes.
Well, there must have been some kind of a spark for her to be ready.
Yes, there was. There definitely was. But so we didn't move there. But the reason I went back to Paris is because she had asked me and the 3 kids to scatter her ashes where we thought she'd want to be. So I scattered her ashes from the Pont-Neuf Bridge right by Notre Dame, because that was our favorite bridge, and we crossed it almost every day. So that was my reason for going over to France first. But then I spent my time in Italy, in the northern part of Italy.
Okay.
And just north of Florence and up to the border. And
do you still travel as rustic as you did back in the days, or a little more
definitely.
creature comforts?
We always had the opinion that the more money you spent on a trip, the less you see of the country you're going.
Okay.
So we
That's
always stayed down market, if you will. Yeah. We didn't stay in hostels together when we were first traveling, but now I do. I stay in hostels a lot. I try to avoid hotels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's an international cast of characters that comes with every hostel, and I find it very interesting. And sometimes you really connect. And I remember going out drinking until 4 a.m. in Spain with a bunch of guys from the hostel. You know, it's a different experience than sitting alone in your room. So
it's not just experiencing the location; it's also experiencing whatever personalities are along the way.
Exactly. That's and I enjoy that. I enjoy meeting people from other places, and it really adds to the experience of traveling for me.
You've traveled a lot. I mean, I've seen so many photos over the years of you on your head in front of these different sites. Is that still your thing? You get someone take a picture of you on your head?
Actually, I did have a headstand in the trip to Italy. Yes. And that used to be Ladessa's idea, because it started out on a mountaintop between Lebanon and Syria, right on the Lebanese-Syrian border, and we were we were trying to decide whether there was enough flat land to pitch a tent. And I said, well, I could do a headstand here. It's that flat, And of course, we were sort of under the influence, and that's how it started. And then after that, every trip, she insisted I do a headstand.
That became the thing, right?
Yeah.
The full circle moment of, okay, this is the proof I was actually there.
Yeah, exactly.
Experienced it.
Right.
Well, is it because of you're into yoga, or is it what prompted the headstand?
Oh, yeah. I was into yoga back when I was in the Army back in '66. And I'm not a strict adherent to all of the principles of my breathing. And, my form is all right. My breathing is not careful. So, but I'm not, I don't consider myself a yogi, but I could do it at the time and I can still do it. So that's just part of my routine, I guess.
Well, for those who don't know you, standing on your head, at what age are you right now?
Thanks a lot. I'll be 80.
I'm outing you on the podcast.
I'll be 80 in August.
Man, that's great. Good for you, man. Some people, nowadays, especially with the way things are with social media, it's like, unless it happens on social media, did it really happen, right? You travel overseas by yourself, have experiences with people that you meet along the way because you are in it for just that, those memories and those experiences for yourself.
Right. I have traveled alone before Linda's passed away. I've done the Camino de Santiago in Spain, the pilgrimage route to the Tomb of St. James, 5 different routes so far.
Okay.
So,
I don't think you know this, but one of the people I have spoken with on the podcast in the last year was Patricia De Leon.
Right.
And,
I know her.
Yeah, and she had told us all about her pilgrimage, and it was inspired by what you recounted to her. She'd already wanted to do that, but your encouragement also prompted her to do that. And she said it is just the beginning for her, that is something she's going to do multiple times, like it sounds like you've done.
Yes. A lot of people think it's one and done, done and dusted, but it isn't really. There's something that calls you back. And part of it, again, is the exposure to people from all over the world. And you get to know people very well. I think my first Camino was 510 miles. And by the time we arrived in Santiago, we knew about 60 pilgrims by name. And as we walked into the city, they were there to greet us. And then in turn, we turned around and greeted those following us, the people we had gotten to know. So it was
such a community.
It really is a community, and it's sort of a bonding situation that I certainly never thought of that. In fact, that phrase may not have existed when I first did it, but it's very similar to being like being in the Army or any difficult situation, a camping trip that goes bad. You sort of share experiences that only you and the other people know about, and so it's a bond that endures.
So I'm sure it's even more than just the physical challenge of it. There's a bit of mental, emotional kind of leaning on each other too, right?
Exactly, helping each other along the way. And I think one of the things that binds you to the other people is that they're as crazy as you are for wanting to walk 500 miles.
500 miles. That's even hard to fathom that. That's like walking to St. Louis from here.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus, Duke. Wow. It seems to me that this conversation about travel and kind of your take on travel is kind of a symbol of your overall life, would you say, with like being an artist and traveling to art fairs? It's kind of all kind of fits into the way you lived your life.
Yes, I'd say so. Being a road warrior, doing shows and stuff, it's you have many of the same factors involved. Maybe it's a little bit easier while you're going somewhere, but once you get there and you're setting up and you've got this community of people, which I treasure beyond almost anything. We made our living on the road. We didn't have any galleries or shops or wholesale or anything like that.
It was all that one-on-one in-person type setting.
Right.
Well, I guess I would even fathom that you were around at the birth of many shows, maybe even the birth of an industry. Would that be fair to say?
I would say pretty close. It seemed like, talking to people, it was about 1972 or so is when there were enough shows, high-quality shows with good customers, that you could make a living at it as opposed to getting a job or even getting a part-time job. You could just get your feet wet and then you'd start swimming. Mm-hmm. It seems like it was about 72 now. In 75, it was still very primitive. At the time, there were no KD canopies. There were no slides. I remember, my first show was the Uptown Art Fair in Minneapolis.
Okay.
And I think the jury process was he held up your check to see if it was any good.
How did your check compare to the next person's check? It's good. Exactly. You're in.
But just as a side note, to give you some idea of how much things have changed, at that time, the Uptown Art Fair fee was $17.50.
For the application?
No, that was the booth fee.
Wow.
And the reason it was such an odd number is that the year before it had been $15, and they tried to raise it to $20, and the artists put up such a stink.
That was a bridge too far, that $5.
Yeah, so we compromised, and it was $17.50.
They made it halfway.
And that's the kind of negotiation that doesn't happen nowadays.
Well, I guess they felt like the artists were an important part of the event, and if they were going to lose artists over $5, well, let's see if we can meet you halfway.
Exactly. And it was quite a different thing at the time too. Like gasoline was 40 cents a gallon. So the profit margin was fabulous.
Right.
Any particular show would be maybe $25 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And many of our shows, at first we did just local shows because we always drove these old beater vans for a long time. So we didn't, finally sort of stretched out, pushed the envelope down to Madison, Wisconsin.
That was the big venture out.
The big venture out.
And if you broke down in Madison, you might have to live in Madison now.
Right. Exactly.
So in 72, which shows were like kind of the groundbreakers back then? Which ones were around that are still here today?
Well, like Lakefront, Uptown. 75 was my first show at the Uptown, but Ledesse was actually in the first Uptown.
Right.
In 1964.
I remember, the last time I did Uptown, you were there, and it might have been the last time you guys did Uptown, and you were telling me about how, didn't they write an article about that she had been there the full duration of the years of the show?
Exactly. She missed a few years when we were in Europe, but she was in at the beginning. I think they set up under the marquee of the Uptown Theater.
Right. Okay.
And there were only a few. I don't think there were 25 artists at the time.
So did people just show up with folding tables, or what did they display on?
Yeah, folding tables or blankets, or just leaning their paintings up against the wall of the stores.
And then what was it being put on by? Was it by the Merchants Association?
It was the Merchants Association.
And
apparently it must have increased the number of customers who came to Uptown, so they continued on for 50-some years now.
Yeah, it's like it brings bodies to an economic center, and it's like advertising in a way.
It is. It's really I think they're more concerned about drawing new customers and letting them know about the area as opposed to the artist.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of merchants associations, the ulterior motives are stronger than the concern for a particular artist's success or not. But obviously, they know that the more successful the artists are, the better quality show they will get. So.
They learn that definitely eventually, and then there's like a learning curve, even how far they can push that. Because I think we have gotten to a point in history where some event organizers really think that there'll always be enough artists to fill whatever spots they want to have. So they kind of feel like they hold all the cards.
I think you're right there, Doug.
Yeah.
I think there are shows that they develop a bit of hubris about their position. And it's not, obviously, it's not good for the artists when that happens.
Yeah, so back in the day there, what were the first handful of shows that, I know you were saying you stayed local, but then when you started to branch out, what were those early shows out there?
Actually, we were in town for quite a while. We went up to Fargo for place called West Acres, and then there was there were shows in Des Moines, and we did a few mall shows too at that time, because mall shows hadn't lost all their credibility. You could actually go to a mall show and make money. So we did shows like at Southdale Shopping Center, which was sort of interesting because Ladess was very pregnant when we did the Southdale Art Fair.
Okay.
And she went into labor at the show.
You're kidding. Okay.
And she's wearing white pants and she's bleeding through her pants. And so we're crossing the parking lot to our hospital, which happened to be where our older daughter was born.
Okay.
And the mall cops were chasing us because they wanted us to take the ambulance. And Ladess says, I'm not taking an ambulance across the parking lot.
By the time you get the car here, I'll be there. So just let me do this.
So there was one of our neighbors, you probably know him, Doug Hicks, watched our booth while we checked in at the hospital. And I went back and then I packed up the jewelry and stuff. So Brenna actually is an art fair baby.
So is she the one that Ladess went into labor with?
Yes. She does art fairs for a living now.
And now for those of you who don't know the Klassen Glanzer family, your daughter, Brenna, is following in your footsteps, and she's out on the road as well.
That's right.
And she's also a jeweler like you guys?
She's a jeweler, yes.
Okay, awesome.
And she's been doing it now for 14 years.
That's got to be a sense of pride to kind of feel like what you started. A lot of times, our children will almost be the antithesis of what we do. Like if you have a banker, then you end up having an artist. And if you're an artist, then you end up having a scientist or something like that.
Right.
It's got to be kind of an interesting feeling to be like, she followed suit on you guys and what you do.
Well, we very carefully decided never to encourage any of them to go into the business.
Okay.
So there was we just never said anything about this is what you could do.
Yeah.
But, actions speak louder than words in many cases. And, I think she saw the freedom that we had. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about doing art fairs is that you're free, you're in charge, your tasks every day change, and your success depends to a high degree on what you're doing and how you do it.
Yeah.
So in that respect,
it's like
it's an attractive.
Yeah, as driven as you are, you directly reap the benefits of that. As hard as you want to work, and if it's not coming to you as much as you want, then that is almost a motivator to work harder and to just figure it out.
Yeah, the business encourages you to strive and succeed. But one of the difficult things I think a lot of people have is that they don't know when to stop succeeding. Like we used to have these guys, especially men whose wives were looking at jewelry. They'd come over to me and they'd say, you know what you need to do? You need to hire some people so you could make more jewelry and do more shows and you could do volume sales.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do that. That's why we're here.
Right.
That's why we're here at an art fair, working for ourselves, and so we can make these decisions on our own.
Yeah.
As opposed to being a supervisor, because if once you have an employee, that employee needs to be doing things. It needs to be employed.
Yeah.
At some task, and suddenly you're a supervisor. It's a freedom that you can get with doing art fairs as an artist that you can't get in other places.
I think about what you said just a few minutes ago, like when you traveled overseas and you kept it as simple as possible because that extended the amount of time you could have experiences. And so this business is about having those experiences with your work, with the people that connect to your work. And it's not about having more money. It's about having more experiences.
Right. And that's one of the things you can do in our business is that you can schedule your time. You can have as much leisure time or travel time or vacation time as you want. And if you can afford it, it's another part of being independent, being an independent artist.
Absolutely. Yeah. So your upbringing, did your upbringing kind of lead you to this hippie artistic lifestyle? Or?
In no way.
No way.
Absolutely no. No, I was one of 10 kids, and I grew up on a dairy farm.
Well, I'd like to say that's unusual, but that's the family one generation before me. That's the kind of family my parents came from, dairy farmers in Iowa. But anyway, so I do know that part of your background really we've connected over.
Right. And the only art that we were exposed to as children were maybe the church art. We were all Catholics, and so the church and, the pageantry of the church is probably about the extent of the art exposure that we had.
What do you mean by the pageantry of the church?
Being Catholic, you've got statues, you've got paintings, you've got murals, you've got processionals and stuff like that is all part of the religion.
Yeah.
We also were German speakers. Mm-hmm. So we had a fairly tight community. There were about 30 towns that spoke German.
Okay.
When I went to grade school, it was in a one-room school with 28 other students.
Wow.
All 8 grades in one room. Certainly we had no art programs.
No.
I had no exposure to art.
I would imagine in a community that small, you're probably pretty much on full display. Everybody knows what everybody's doing, and it's just, it's very myopic.
That's one really good reason to get the hell out of there. Yeah. Everybody knows what you're doing. And because we had been here for so long in Minnesota, we came in 1847. The intermarriage was just astonishing because for the first 70 years that people were living in Stearns County, they never married more than 5 miles away, as far as you could comfortably ride a horse and ride it back.
Okay.
So everybody was very closely related, and as time went on, you had to search out somebody you weren't related to.
Yeah, weren't too closely related to, and
exactly.
lots of brothers of the same family marrying sisters of the other family.
Exactly,
I'm sure.
Yes. And there were so many weddings because everybody had so many kids that you always get invited from both sides. You'd be invited to the wedding because you were related to both sides.
Okay.
So
anyway, if you were a free thinker that was kind of outside of the norm, escaping was probably what was necessary. True.
Right. Well, I left when I was 13. I went to the seminary.
And was that your way out?
Yes, it was.
That was my dad's way out too. He said his parents would let him go to college in the city as long as it was to pursue the priesthood, and that's what he did.
Oh. Well, I left after 8th grade, and both of my parents were against it. But, you could hardly stand in the way of a vocation.
Right. I mean, that was the highest praise for a German Catholic was that a child was going to enter into the religious order.
And why my parents didn't believe that, I don't know. I think my father was out counting on my labor coming into.
Well, isn't that part of
farm.
It? Yeah, I mean the kids are free labor.
Right. So anyway, so I left when I was 13, and then I spent 9 years in the seminary.
So when you leave at 13, does that mean you're actually entering the seminary at that age, or are you like entering like a high school that's grooming you for that?
Well, it was at St. John's University. They had a prep school there.
Okay.
Oh, it was a rather strenuous education.
Well, was the intention on your part very clear that it was to escape, or was it actually you thought you wanted to be a priest?
No, I had a vocation to it.
Okay.
And gradually I came to realize that, especially as the church changed in the mid-'60s, I realized that I didn't belong there anymore, and I began to question a lot of other things too.
Uh-huh.
It was difficult. It was difficult to quit. Because when you're 22 years old and you've spent 9 years in the seminary, it's approaching half your life.
Right.
And I felt like I had irreparably damaged my future here on earth because I had missed my entire adolescence, and I never thought I'd be able to fit in.
Just because you didn't know what was out there, right? I mean,
exactly.
So you felt like all you knew was this very cloistered life, and now you were coming to terms with that had to change. And what's next?
Yeah. Well, what was next was I quit in January, and I had my cassock and collar still hanging in the closet at the seminary. And in February, I was in the Army. I got drafted.
You did. So did you have to go in Vietnam?
No, I was, because of my fairly extensive Latin and Greek background, I scored high in the language test, and I was sent to language school in Monterey, California, for a year of intensive Arabic. Mm. And then I was stationed in East Africa.
Okay.
In Asmara, Ethiopia. Well, now it's Eritrea, but at that time it was still Ethiopia.
What would they have you do over there?
I was a translator.
And was there was military presence there? I mean, it wasn't. I thought everything was happening in Vietnam then.
Oh no, we had a base of there were 1,800 Americans on our base.
Okay.
There were even dependents there, wives and children came there too.
Okay.
And so we had an American presence.
So you really had to feel like you were just plucked out of your Midwestern existence and into like a whole new world.
Yes, very much so. And I enjoyed it a lot.
Really?
And I especially liked the fact Asmara used to be the Mussolini's old capital when Ethiopia was a colony.
Okay.
So there were still 7,000 Italians there.
Mm.
And so that a lot of African cities they've got a bit of a rough edge on them, but the Italian presence there, the boulevards, the restaurants, the culture was such that it felt a lot like Africa, but there were sort of like little niceties that made it a lot easier to live there.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it a lot. And
how long were you in the military?
I was there in the military for 4 years. So when I came back from Ethiopia, I went back to the language school as a German assistant instructor in German. Okay. And until my time was up, and then I quit.
Okay.
Then I was discharged. I would have quit a lot earlier.
Yeah. And then that puts you at about what age? Like early 20s?
Well, I was about 26 by the time I got out of the Army.
Then you've got your whole life in front of you. I mean, really, you've had all of these experiences, and then it's like, now what?
Exactly.
So how did you kind of find your way? What sorts of things did you do?
If you're a farm kid, you can walk onto any construction site and get a job.
True.
You just tell me you worked that you grew up on a farm. And
you'll work, until you're like completely exhausted. They know that they've got a hard worker.
Right, and you know how to work. I remember one job I had, it was a guy said, start shoveling that pile of sand over there. This was down in Arizona, and I started shoveling, and he said, you're hired.
Something about the intensity behind it or the dedication?
No, it was the fact that I was using my knee as a lever.
Oh.
And
okay.
You see people in movies and they're holding a shovel and they're sort of like all of their motion is in their arms.
Yes.
Somebody who grew up
physical shoveling. Labor, almost like prison.
Yeah, you can tell right away if somebody's experienced or not.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was able to work construction a lot.
So did you kind of become this artistic hippie before Ladez, or was Ladez the influence that kind of set you down?
Oh, she was absolutely the influence.
Was she?
Yes, because I was working construction and I got laid off during one of the big bust. It's sort of a boom and bust industry. Mm. At the time, someone had come to her shop and wanted to have her design a line of jewelry. She had a craft shop. And so she did, and it just took off.
So she was doing jewelry even when you met her?
Well, she was doing beaded jewelry.
Okay, gotcha.
And we were just I started helping her out, and we really were ready for when this bead craze hit. We were prepared. We were off and running well before that. Okay. So it was great. But then we lost interest after a while. Stringing beads, it's fun designing stuff, but it's difficult if that's all you do. So we bought a book on silversmithing, and that's how we got started.
There was no internet back then. You couldn't do YouTube videos on how to learn how to silversmith.
No, we just had this one book. It probably would have been better if we had some training, but we didn't. And in a way, it made our work unique to us because we didn't have much influence to guide us.
My last interview, I talked with Oliver Schnorr from Naples. And he got into jewelry because of his wife, who was a traditionally trained jeweler from Germany. And he described him being self-taught as being like, you aren't in a tunnel vision with your creativity. And he could lean on Christiana for the technical side of things when he needed it. But the designs were more wide open when you are self-taught, because you can see things from a fresh set of eyes.
I think you're less likely to follow in your instructors or your professor's footsteps if you haven't had that academic experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard, actually, I read it in Ledez's obituary years ago, that she was categorized as a creative powerhouse. Is that accurate?
I would definitely say so. She was up for the challenge of changing everything all the time.
Yeah.
She worked a lot harder at it than I did.
Okay.
I was sort of a slacker when we worked together. Although we always each had our own money, we kept track of our own work.
Oh.
We had separate accounts. So
you had different lines of work that was under the umbrella of the partnership?
No, they were compatible designs. But I had designed some of them, and I was making some of them, and she was making her part, and we kept track of who's selling what.
So it wasn't a pass back and forth kind of thing, or are you saying actual literal selling at the show, whoever would sell it?
Oh, no. We would each sell our, most people didn't know that we had separate arrangements.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
We sold it all as our work.
I never knew that. Never even considered that over the years. That I just assumed that each piece you guys kind of like had different stages you worked on it, but
we never worked together.
Really?
we never collaborated on a single piece.
Interesting.
And we ran our lives in a very equal manner. Like when the kids came along, one person would have the kids for 6 hours in the morning, and then in the afternoon they would work, and then the person who had them the kids in the morning would put them to bed at night. Mm-hmm. And then it would flip the next day.
So there was a focus on equality.
Absolutely. And whenever we bought groceries, you'd write them up on the chart on the wall, and at the end of the year, you'd add it up and split the difference.
Why did you set it up that way?
Because we both wanted to be independent. Mm. So we never had a question we never had to ask each other, should I buy this or not? You had your own money. You do it whatever you want to, just as long as you paid your part of the bills.
Right. So within your partnership, you felt like the strength of the partnership was having your own individual autonomy.
Exactly.
That's cool. That's quite feminist in a way for you guys to operate as partners back then in that time, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yes. Well, I would say that I'm a feminist. A lot of people claim they're feminists, but it felt like we had equal lives and we had our own money, so we never had to argue about money. We never had discussions about money.
Yeah.
Of course, it helps if you're making about the same amount of money.
True. Yeah.
If you have one person in the partnership is making 80% versus 20%, of course, you have to do proportional sort of things like that, but that's the way we did it.
That's interesting because I think that some people enter relationships and at some point along the way, you start to feel like, am I dependent or is this person dependent on me? And then it's like it tends to maybe lose a little bit of that equality or that feeling of like who's pulling their weight, or is somebody with you because they're your equal partner or because they want something from you or need something from you,
I had no problem going off to walk the Caminos for 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, because I would work harder before I left and I would work hard when I got back.
You'd make up the difference.
And Ledez was fine with it because I was taking care of my part of the arrangement. So it gives a person a lot of freedom. And, like she took a lot of time off because she was an inline skating marathoner. And so she trained a lot in the summertime.
I've seen photos that you've posted of her with her like skates and helmet, and I didn't realize she was a marathoner though.
Yeah. In fact, the day before her first cancer surgery, she actually set a record for the North Shore Marathon for her age group.
Really?
I don't know if she had the top record, but I think she was in the top 3 on that in her age category.
Wow.
She was fast. She skated the equivalent of 26 4-minute miles.
Wow. So when you say marathoner, so is it 26 miles, just like a running marathon?
Exactly, the same route that Grandma's marathon followed.
Interesting. Wow. She seemed so small and so delicate, but must have been really strong to be able to do that.
When she was training in the summer, I used to ride my bike with her to keep her company. And I had a 21 speed bike, and as we got closer to the end of July, I could barely keep up.
Seriously?
Because she was super fast.
That's really cool.
So she did have time to do that.
Right. So whether you were off doing the Camino, she had her things that recharged her batteries. That was more to life than just, making jewelry.
Exactly.
So you raised your daughters in this lifestyle. I mean, what kind of an impact does growing up with parents like you guys, what does that do?
Well, we took them with us on the road all the time. And a lot of times in the winter, we would just pull them out of school for 6 weeks when we went down to Florida. And the teachers were very cooperative. They sent along the homework and things. They
could hand out just like 6 weeks worth of homework and come back and they have it done. And
yeah. Well, I always thought that a day on the road, you'd learn as much as you would on it as a day on the school.
Life experience.
Experience counts for a huge, and they had a fairly free range. If the three of them stuck together, they were usually, fairly safe. I think one time they got caught on the 21st floor of a building that was under construction in Tampa. They were playing cards up on that floor.
Okay. They were off exploring.
So they were more like free-range kids than kids are now.
Yeah, and there's no cell phones or anything, so they're stuck. I mean, they've got to figure out how to get out of that situation. How old were they? Like middle schoolers then, or what?
Oh, no, they were
younger than that. Wow.
Yeah, they were like 10 and 8 and 6 or something, like 10 and 8 and 4.
Okay.
Rather.
I had these kind of conversations with Mickey and Reiko last year about the free range kids. You know what I mean? That's what her and Reiko and Luke had a very similar experience like you're talking about with your daughters.
Right.
I don't know that they ever got away and went up in a building and got stuck, but I think they roamed the art fair sites for pretty much.
Yeah. Well, one time we were at the plaza at breakfast, at the artist breakfast at the plaza, and one of the volunteers came up to our table and said, there are a couple of cops who would like to speak to you in the back of the room.
Okay.
We go, okay. We went back to the back of the room, and these two big cops, and our three kids, they were standing back there, and the kids were sort of hanging their heads. And the cop said, "We found your children taking money out of the fountain. The money was intended for the blind kids," or something like that.
They're like it was a wishing pond or something, right?
Yeah, and he said, "Well, we didn't know that. We just thought the money was there for the taking." So they did have some run-ins with authorities, but generally they were very good.
So we know of Brenna. Tell me about your other daughters.
Well, Ariana she graduated with a minor in art. She used to do prints and stuff, but then she had kids, and so her life sort of took a very domestic turn for a while. But Brenna and Ivy, they have traveled everywhere. They've had, I think they were 17 months on a backpacking trip in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
And Brenna just got back from a scuba diving trip in Borneo. She was in Australia for 2 months after Plaza.
That's great.
She and Ivy went up to Borneo for, I think it was 9 days. But I think they travel a lot because they're very familiar with it too.
Yeah, they get some of the same experiences that you had been seeking out over the years, and
right, and they're frugal about a lot of things, and because travel is important to them.
Yeah,
it's a sort of a values I think that people develop.
Well, what have you gotten over the years out of your travels?
Well, I think probably a huge appreciation for the differences in people and geography and customs. I think I've seen the top and the bottom. I mean, I've been in very, very poor countries and very well-to-do countries, and I'm interested in history.
I do know that about you. Many times when you were on the circuit regularly, our conversations would revolve around history and politics and travel and all those things.
On this last trip to Italy, I went up to Bolzano in northern Italy, and I don't know if you remember, there was the Iceman who was discovered in 1991. It was a man who was frozen in the Alps,
okay,
and he was discovered by a couple of hikers, and they thought it was a murder scene.
Okay.
And they called the cops. It turns out he was a Stone Age hunter.
Wow.
And he had arrows with stone tips on them. He was wearing a bearskin hat and hide clothing and shoes that were woven shoes that were filled with straw so he kept warm. Well, I was really interested in that when that happened. But then when I had my DNA analyzed by 23andMe, in the column under famous people you're related to, the Iceman was in my column.
You're shitting me. Oh, my God. I remember when you were telling that story, I was thinking back to the year that we were neighbors at Coconut Grove, and you had just had your 23andMe done. Do you remember what year it was? It seems like a really long time ago.
It was about 15 years ago, I'd say. It was probably about 2006 or something like that.
And that was
maybe
before it had ever grown into what it is now, where long-lost relatives are being connected through DNA and everything.
Right.
And you were telling me about this program and how excited you were by it.
Yeah. Well, I went up to the city where there was a dispute about whether it was in Austria or in Italy. So they resurveyed the area, and it turned out it was in Italy. So the museum where he's located right now, it's a 5-story building, and you can look through a window and see him. He's actually still frozen. The flesh is still on his body.
Wow!
And they were able to determine the contents of his stomach and where he grew up based on the tartar on his teeth.
He was so preserved.
Yeah, he was so preserved. And then it turned out it was a murder scene. He was shot from behind and below. As he was going up this mountain, he was shot with a stone-tipped arrow.
Wow.
And it was I just thought, I got to go see my relatives.
How many generations away was it, right?
Well, it was 320 generations back. So it was 5,300 years ago. And it was before the first dynasty in Egypt. Third dynasty is when they built the pyramids, and it was like he lived before Stonehenge.
Jeez.
I mean, 5,300 years ago. Now, I can't imagine how much DNA they could base a connection to me, but
right.
I don't know. I just accepted it.
Well, did you see the resemblance when you walked up to him?
Actually, no. I'm not quite that dried out yet. But they actually don't let them dry out. Every 6 weeks, they spray them with a fine mist, and they keep them frozen because they don't want them to desiccate.
Okay.
They wanted, and they've got a team of scientists that have been working for 30 years on learning all they can about them, and as the science develops, they learn more and more all the time.
So are they doing like tests and studies on him, or is it just to preserve him for like museum purposes or what?
No, they're still doing tests on him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, it seems like it's every 6 months or so I hear more about, something they had just discovered about him.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of your history, I know that you're a writer, and is that kind of where you put your writing energies towards? Do you kind of write about what you know, or what are your stories about?
My stories, the book I had published, I don't know, that was a long time ago, 25 years ago. There were stories of my growing up in Stearns County, because it was with every passing year, it becomes more and more distant and unusual to grow up the way I did.
Okay.
And after I had been away to seminary for 9 years and then 4 years in the Army, that was 13 years. And I came back, and things had drastically changed in 13 years, because as soon as television came in, the German disappeared. Like my younger brothers and sisters don't speak German. They're the last 5 of them. Don't. They can understand German. And, we got paved roads. We started to have outsiders coming in. But television was massive. It was massive as far as the social change.
Just letting in what is going on out in the world and culture and all that.
I remember it was in the 3rd grade in grade school. It was the first time I ever heard of an ocean.
Really?
I hadn't heard of an ocean. And then I nearly cried, because I thought, well, I will never see one.
You proved that one wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's how isolated it was.
Yeah.
Because nobody had ever really gone anywhere after they had traveled all the way over from Germany and Austria and Switzerland. all this mix of people had come 5,000 miles, and then they just stayed put in the county. They just never went anywhere after that. And I felt like I was part of that.
Yeah.
I felt like I was never going to be able to see anything different.
So, but then recapturing that, did you feel like you wanted to kind of preserve that? Not that you wanted that way of life to be lived anymore, but did you feel like you needed for it to know that it had existed?
Sort of, yeah, exactly. Sort of bear witness to the fact that this was what that was like at that time.
Hmm.
And at first I was thinking, somebody ought to write about this. But then I realized that, there wasn't anybody. Like, the first people who went to high school even were only like 5 years older than I was, and that most of them didn't go more than a year. So my brother didn't go to high school at all. I thought, well, I guess it's going to be me. So I started writing stories, and I wrote them in fictional form because I thought nobody's going to read any dry history on someplace like
right, like, and this happened and this happened. But as fiction, it's more like getting into the heart of the story, getting into the heart of the characters.
Right. It was categorized when it was published as creative nonfiction, is where you're using real life and then shaping them with plot and dialogue. And
they call
detail.
those biopics nowadays.
Yeah, I guess. But I had written a whole bunch of these stories, and my writing group encouraged me to submit them to a competition, and it was picked to be published. So
wow,
that's how it got published. I sort of never expected that.
You didn't have aspirations for it to be published necessarily. That wasn't why you were doing it.
Well, I guess I always thought I had a long way to go before I'd be ready to be published.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a surprise to me.
But then, is that something that carries on? Are you still a writer, or just an avid reader? Or?
I'd say I'm an avid reader. I just sort of working a little bit on. The kids wanted me to write down our family history, and I'm sort of working on that as our rather complicated family history going back to the 1600s.
Cool.
So otherwise, I don't write. Writing is a really lonely business. I guess now I wouldn't have many interruptions.
Sure.
It would be easy enough to do it again. But at the time, I always felt like I was taking time away from
living
the rest of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Living and interacting and having experiences.
Yeah.
It's so solitary, like, let me get down my thoughts. And I mean, people experience it, and they get to experience what you've written. And so it's almost like you don't get to feel that connection. Your audience will feel the connection because of reading your words. But I can see that you are such a social being that might be like once it was done, you're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Okay, I did that, been there, done that.
Yeah, in a way, yes. Not that I have ruled it out for the future, but when I finished it, I sort of felt like, well, that part of my life is behind me now. I had no desire to go back to that.
Yeah. I'm sure it helped you kind of process. I think we all go through a period in life when we do circle back to things that happened in our past. And, maybe it was a period of reflection and processing and moving on.
Definitely was that. And there were sort of psychological and disturbances that you end up having to work through if you're writing about it. Mm-hmm. You have to put yourself back into that world and try to figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Come at it from where you're not the center of the story. You're coming at it from the different players or the different characters in the story, and you can see more of a broader picture, perhaps.
And I think the distance, I was actually, 30 years later, that I was writing from a distance of 30 years, which a lot of times people will write when they're in a foreign country, living in a foreign country. I know a lot of people will begin writing because they can see much more clearly what the society is like that they had left. And I can think of any number of authors who wrote about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do find people are so immersed in our own culture, our own country, and have that kind of that myopic view of just like we live in the greatest country in the world until we start to realize what else is really out there. Certainly there are things that we have that we should be really grateful for, but those aren't always the reason that people are alive on the planet either. The materials or those kinds of experiences. That it sounds to me like you got a lifetime of memories from seeking those out on your travels.
And strangely enough, people always ask, well, how does your traveling affect your jewelry? I say, it almost never affected us at all. I mean, we were becoming more and more familiar with all kinds of different work, different jewelry from different countries and stuff, but it really wasn't reflected in any way after we got home. We had our own agenda, and a lot of the jewelry was very traditional, and our jewelry wasn't traditional, so we wouldn't be going down that path. It's sort of like if you're a potter and you see primitive pots that are made in a culture where pottery is just the functional thing, you probably wouldn't let it affect. It wouldn't affect too much of your art pottery if that's what you were doing, or sculpture, clay sculpture, or anything like that. And it's an odd sort of dichotomy that people have a sort of an idea of what they want to do, what they want to make, and just like the introduction of another influence isn't necessarily going to change the direction of their work.
Well, I think of it like this, and tell me what you think about this idea. It maybe isn't that you're drawing inspiration of design, that you see a direct, let's say replicating of what you've seen from other jewelry from other parts of the world. But what you do learn from your experiences is that feeling of being open, like an open channel to what comes next, that not being so predetermined as to what an outcome might be, and having that skill put into any kind of a creative endeavor kind of opens us up to really exploring.
Right. And in that way, you see how another society developed and how they decided to, let's say, make jewelry. Or if you look back at during the Roman Empire, the glass that you see, or the Syrian glass, and some of it's Lebanese, you see what their aesthetic was, but it isn't necessarily something that you want to imitate, but it's just sort of like, so this is how they did it back then. And you realize that you're in a long tradition of human endeavor to make whatever your craft is.
And even from like primitive means, it's like we can have technology be dropped in our lap in order to do things maybe easier or faster, but that does not necessarily make the designs any better or the nature of the work any better.
It might make it possible to do things that weren't possible in the past. Well, looking at jewelry, if you look at the Scythian work from the steppes of Russia, my God, I don't know of any jewelers who could do the work at that level. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I haven't come across them. I wouldn't even begin to have the skill to even replicate it. Looking directly at, let's say, a pair of earrings that have got such complex work. There's such complex procedures that are involved in it. But it's good to know. It's good to know that that's what was possible once, and it's something that you could aspire to in your own work.
So thinking back over kind of the history of just over 50 years of art shows out there, there's obviously been an evolution, to say the least. What would you say are some of the ones that kind of stick out at you most? Like with how the industry has shifted from what you knew it to be?
Well, probably the very first thing was the introduction of canopies. Like the original was the Katie canopy. I think it had a very decided effect on the social connection between artists. Like we used to just be sitting out in the open. You would have 5 minutes where you didn't have a customer. You'd be talking to your neighbor. But once you got a canopy and you had walls, suddenly you're cut off. The only way you can talk to your neighbors is to walk around a wall and see them. And I think at that point, there was less identification with fellow artists. Because before that, it was nothing but identification. You were sitting in the rain with your neighbor.
Right.
That made a big difference, the introduction of that. And then, then as things became more formal, sending in slides, the whole business with the red dot, submitting slides to be juried, and the introduction of the bureaucracy.
The competition aspect of it?
Yeah, it was more competitive, but it was also because somebody had to administer all this selection.
Yeah.
Things became more and more expensive.
Okay.
I think it did bring up the quality of the work because you couldn't just keep doing the same thing. There was sort of a built-in impetus to compete with other artists to have the best set of 5 slides. And it even bled over into having the best looking display. And then there were shows that gave you a prize if you got the best display, and that was certainly not in the mix when we started out. And then I think the development of the super shows was really a big thing because a lot of people, I think, if you get 1 or 2 of the big super shows, you can stay in business. People are able to make a living doing more big shows if they can get into them and have more time to develop their own work or their own personal lives. Like starting with Cherry Creek and St. Louis and Winter Park and, Old Town. You get like shows that are wonderfully lucrative. And that's one thing that you didn't have at the early stages. Although there wasn't that much difference between how much money you netted.
So you're saying the birth of the super shows, the net ended up being about the same back in the day?
Well, it was the super shows. It was a lot more than what it started out with. But like just for example, the Uptown Art Fair.
Sure.
I shouldn't probably even be saying this because it'll probably get back to them. But okay, they have the fee structure is such now that you would expect that you would make a lot more money than you did back when it was $17.50.
Okay.
But it's not true. In fact, sometimes you make less than you did back then.
Oh, I had Cindy Lyric on as a guest. Duke, you're not breaking any news. She's talked all about that.
Okay.
How she went to bat and kind of broke it down and let the shows know that more artists means more booth fees, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every artist is now making more money, and if you want to have a good show, you need to find that sweet spot of the right amount of artists, the right booth fee, so that everybody wins. And
then the right audience.
And the right audience. That's the whole thing right there. But we talked a lot in this last year about getting off the hamster wheel. We learned that before COVID, that the chasing of all the super shows and executing all the super shows and the more and the more and the more was driving people crazy. Because the more you work, the more you have to work to keep the train going down the track.
Yeah, I think that was really an eye-opener for a lot of people is that we found out that if they got rid of the bottom 20% of their shows, you could probably make just about as much money because you didn't have the expense and you had time in the studio to prepare for your other shows.
Yeah.
So that made quite a difference. And it could only have been the COVID type of situation that would reveal that.
Sure.
Because nobody ever stops to take time off and saying, I wonder how it would work if we did a lot less.
And it's a complicated puzzle because, you let's say you write down all of the expenses and you compare them against the gross receipts, and it's like there's so many variables that it's just really hard to get to those numbers until the rug's pulled out and you have nothing to look at but no income.
Right. I know, we actually did an analysis probably about 1990 or so. We wrote down how much we made and what the expenses were and the driving in the motels and stuff, and then compared that also the time out of the studio, which I think a lot of people don't really count that. But, like if you're doing a show and it takes you out of the studio for 4 days, including your weekend, by the way, that has to be figured in. And, we didn't overrate ourselves as far as how much we were paying ourselves when we were on the road, but it did jigger the figures a lot.
To what became a let's try it again versus a let's stay home decision.
And oddly enough, some of the shows, the local shows that were one-day shows, and that you were able to sleep in your own bed, suddenly went up to scale quite a ways compared to, let's say, driving a day out and a day back and having hotels and the gas bills and all that. Those shows would suddenly sort of become almost on the par, and you'd have to decide, okay, I don't want to sit at home all the time because the shows, local shows, are like poor quality. So you want to be part of the continuing search for good shows. I mean, prestigious shows. Yeah. But you could see that things were balancing a lot because you were figuring out how much you were spending.
I remember that time that you were kind of getting the brass tacks, putting it all together, because there was a year there where you were saying to me, Ladez and I, we decided to switch up our jury images this year, and we kind of wanted to cut back on our shows and do a few less. And I'm happy to say that the shows were willing to help us out in that regard or something. So you must have had like a bad jury year, and you didn't seem worried about it or concerned. You're like, it'll all get figured out. Where I was in that stage having little kids thinking that would terrify me to be in that position.
Well, I think one of the keys to being an art fair artist is always spend less than you're making. It's probably true for just about any endeavor.
For sure, yeah.
Is that we were the absolute denizens of Motel 6. We never stayed at a fancy hotel unless except for that one little period when Hotwire and Priceline.
Right, they were.
And I used to post the cheap ones. On the art fair source book or whatever, not bad. Otherwise we stayed at Motel 6 because if you keep your expenses down, you make more money.
Absolutely.
And it sort of puts your feet down on the ground. You have a good basis for staying at a Sheraton 5-star or whatever. It's just a personal thing.
Sure.
I feel more comfortable being with my own people.
I see. Well, I remember too, one of the things Ladez had said to me once was that she kind of viewed the art fair life, being an artist, as almost like being a missionary, in the sense that taking a vow of poverty, not that you wanted to be poor, but you wanted to live simply so that what was important could be experienced.
I don't think we ever really talked about that sort of thing. I mean, it was just sort of like, I'm surprised to hear that she mentioned that to you, because we were so much on the same page that we never even...
Like that was understood, but it wasn't actually had to be overtly stated.
Exactly. It was just implicit.
Well, I know for a fact that you have always been the kind of person who valued people, valued experiences, because I still remember my first interaction with you. We were at the Wausau Art Festival 21, 22 years ago. I think I'd only been doing shows for about a year, and I didn't know anybody, and was just getting to figuring things out. In our first conversation, you said to me, so you're here and not at St. Louis this weekend, are you? And I didn't even know about St. Louis at that point, so I didn't even know I didn't even know what you meant by that. I just knew that I was doing local shows, local to where I'm at. And you struck up this conversation with me, and I felt so new, and you were a veteran, and there were no airs. There were no I'll come back and interact with this guy when I know he's going to be around the block a little while longer. You treat me as if it was, you'd know me for, your whole career. And that was very meaningful to me. And I've always appreciated that we have had that rapport over the years.
Well, you have a better memory than I do. I have to say, I remember you being at the show, but people are always quoting stuff to me that I don't remember that I said.
You're so damn profound, Duke. You're a fountain of wisdom. You can't be bothered to remember that shit.
Everything's accessible because it's on the surface.
So
anyway,
well, looking back over all your years on the road, I mean, do you ever miss it, or do you get to spend enough time out there being, Brenna's plus one out there?
Yeah, I think being a roadie sort of softens the transition because, like, I've helped her down at Winter Park, and this year I helped her at Jazz Fest, St. Louis, and the Plaza.
Oh.
And so I got to see all my old friends and got to see what things look like now, and they have changed.
Yeah,
in the 3 years that I've been.
Well, speaking of super shows, those were a few super shows that you were at, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I got the gift of COVID from Jazz
Did
Fest.
you? Oh,
yeah.
Dang it!
I got home and 2 days later I had COVID. So.
But you had the booster, so you did just fine with it, right?
Right. I had a very mild case of it.
Thank God.
But there's still exciting things happen. Like I was at the the Kansas City show.
Yeah. I
was handing a customer a necklace, and as I handed it to him, my shorts dropped down around my ankles.
For crying out loud.
I don't know what happened. It was all of a sudden I was just standing there in my underwear, and I just pulled them back up again, and then made the sale.
Oh, gosh. Lucky that didn't end up on the internet, Duke.
Sort of the unforeseen things that are part of art fair life.
So is that why you're wearing suspenders today? I was just wondering.
No, but Brenna bought me a sort of a rubberized belt now that I can tighten up a little better.
It's like, come on, Dad.
Yeah, that was a big surprise.
Oh.
But there are also a lot of surprises like that. I have to tell you about this one occasion, and I'm usually a bit of a smart ass, but not consistently. But there was a guy at Boca, and he was buying a pair of earrings, and it was just like $78 for a pair of earrings. And he just would not accept that price, and he just kept trying to bargain with me. And he says, "Well, how about it just drop the taxes?" And this went on for like about 5 minutes.
Relentless.
Yeah, just relentless. And finally I said, "Wait a minute. How about if I show you something you can afford?"
Oh, that is...
that was not the diplomatic thing response to his pleading. Wow, he just went berserk. He said, "I could buy your whole booth," and I said, "Please
then do."
Yeah,
put your money where your mouth is, buddy.
Yeah, there are lots. I remember a lot of things. There are just the oddest encounters with customers.
Yeah,
people who like this. I remember one lady said, "What do you call this piece here?" And I said, "Well, it's a pendant."
Yeah. And
she said, "But I know, but what is the name of it?" And I said, "It doesn't have a name. It's a piece of jewelry."
Yeah. She
says, "Well, I'm going to call it Tinkerbell."
Okay.
Okay. You just run into things that...
A name is going to give it a few more zeros at the end of it.
Yeah. And at the same show, it was like the same weekend. It must have been the weekend for Weirdos to come out. These two women came by, and they said, one of the women said, "I'm just completely impressed and blown away by the quality of the work at this show."
Yeah.
She said, it's making me think about going into art myself. And the other lady says, "So what are you thinking about? Are you thinking of 3D or 2D?" And she says, "No, I think I'll start out with 1D and see how that works." I mean, where do you ever get a chance to hear conversations like that? I mean, it's one of my favorite things is listening in and overhearing conversations.
Absolutely, just the outrageousness behind it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, Duke, we've already been talking now for an hour and a half, believe it or not. This has been...
sorry.
And you're not apologizing. This has been a great conversation. I wasn't gonna shut you up. What are you talking about? This is podcast gold, man. But so I just want to say thanks for everything out there. And I mean, really, a lot of us don't even realize what kind of rudimentary kind of system, how this market that has grown to what we now know it to be, how it started way back in the, in the Wayback Machine. And people like you really gave the industry legs. It was built on the backs of people just like you. And I just feel like we just owe you a huge debt, and I appreciate everything you've done.
Well, it was a privilege to be a part of this life. And one of the real beautiful things about it is the friendships that we have developed over the years.
Yeah.
With this huge variety of people, all of whom are sort of weird in their own ways. It's sort of like the people you meet when you travel all over the world. Is you get to know people who are from a different place or coming from a different place, and you appreciate that. For me, it's been a privilege, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's true. It's a fun life that we have. Well, I hope to see you next year out on the road with Brenna sometime. So thanks for taking the time and sitting down with me, and it's been good to catch up.
All right. Thanks a lot, Doug.
You bet. Take care, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Multi-dimensional talk, Douglas, but let's stick it to the 1D.
That was hilarious, that story he told, man.
It's funny. Duke is one of those guys that I've always been aware of, but I've never really met him, and I feel like I kind of know him. Well, I do know him better now, but I can't wait to hopefully get out there and see him on the road or see him at some point.
He's still kicking it out there with his daughter, with Brenna. He did 3 or 4 shows last year with her, and still traveling, still seeing the world. So Duke is still an active part of our industry out there, and we really appreciate all those, just kind of where we came from and what this life meant to him and what it means to a lot of us.
Absolutely. I was talking to some artists over the weekend, Douglas, and we were, some shows that they've done and that they have, there have been hiccups along the way, and they leave you with animosity. And, with the high show fees, has it ever occurred to you to apply to a show and then is it worth it $45 to Xerox a picture of my butt and just send it?
Just to give a ironic kind of application.
Oh, sure. Yeah, ironic application. It's sweeping the nation. Okay. All right. Great talk with Duke, man. The tacos are starting to waft in out of the hipster lobby. I think I'm going to go eat some breakfast and
sounds good, man.
Great to see your smiling face, my friend.
You too.
Your spirits are back up and feeling a little optimism coming.
Feeling like my old self again. Well, safe drive on your commute back to Santa Fe, and enjoy your time with your family.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you later, man. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, check out Will's website at willarmstrongart.com and my website at sigworthglass.com.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.